The year is 1987. You're a large computer company with a problem. Although you created the personal computer system that's taken the world by storm, you've lost control of it. Other companies have muscled in to get in on the action, and you're left scrambling to catch up. You've got to get back on top and reclaim your rightful position. But how are you going to do it?
Well, you're going to PS to it with the IBM PS2.
This was IBM's solution, the PS2. It was bigger, faster, and better in every way, and it would bring IBM back to the top. This one in particular is the Model 56SX, introduced in late 1991 for between $2,400 and $4,000, depending on the configuration, or between $4,700 and $7,800 today. Inside its modest chassis is a 20 MHz Intel 386SX processor, 8 MB of RAM, an 80 MB SCSI hard drive, and onboard VGA 16 color graphics at 640 by 480. Respectable specs for the time, although nothing spectacular. In keeping with the PS2's design philosophy of function over form, the front is clean and simple, with a couple of badges, a key lock, floppy drive, power button, and status lights. This computer is unique in my collection for also being the only one with an extra high density floppy drive. Around the back we find these. This one comes with 3 microchannel slots, VGA, serial, parallel, PS2 for keyboard and mouse, and coaxial and AUI inputs on the network card. This one's a bit of a mystery though. I can't find any information on what it could be, and although it looks like a SCSI port, the pin count doesn't match. I count either 30 or 60 pins, and all Google can come up with is Apple Docs, so stuff it, this is where you plug in your iPod now. Inside we can see that IBM wasted no space. This case is packed tightly, and it can be hard to make out some of what's in here. I had a bit of a prod around, but didn't really see much of interest. Somewhere in there is hiding the 386 CPU, but I'll come back to that a bit later on. Here's a closer look at the network board, a Novell. How novel. 8556s ship with 4 MB of RAM stock, but this one's been bumped up to 8 out of a maximum possible of 16. The case for this one seems to have been manufactured on October 16th, 1991, but I'm guessing this machine was assembled in late 1992, going by the floppy drive. Of course, a machine of this quality deserves a suitable monitor, in this case a matching IBM 8513 that this computer would have been designed to use. It's nothing special, but it gets the job done in IBM's usual sensible and straightforward fashion. Right, now let's make it actually do something. There's a PS2 ready for work. Work being the operative word, because IBM didn't market these to home users. These were intended for use in offices, like railway companies and city planners. This was a machine that likely spent its time in a cubicle somewhere doing boring stuff like word processing. That's not to say it couldn't game though. Whoever owned this before me installed a few Microsoft Entertainment Pack games, and of course, being a DOS machine, DOS gaming is very much available. However, you'll have to put up with either no sound or just simple beeping, since there's no sound card inside, and with the exception of the modern Resound 2 OPL3 card, you're not likely to find one, since MCA cards are as rare as rocking horse droppings. DOS games are almost all this machine can handle anyway. Unless all you intend to play is solitaire, gaming in Windows can be rather slow on that old 386. Indeed, its performance under Windows in general is passable, but not spectacular. SimCity can cope, but even fairly simple games like SimEarth and SimTower were putting it to the test. Unfortunately, I don't have many games I can test on this machine, and those I'd like to demonstrate need a 486 or better. It's also worth bearing in mind that you've got to go steady with that hard drive. While 80 MB wasn't shabby for the time, it can still fill up fast if you're not careful. There's not a great deal on here, only DOS, Windows, a few small games and some software that came with the machine, and I've only got about 10 or 15 megs to spare. Fortunately though, a zip disk will happily back up the entire hard drive and still have room to spare. And speaking of the hard drive, that bay beneath the floppy drive is actually where the hard drive lives, so if you wanted one of the CD drives IBM had on offer, you had to decide whether you could live without either your floppy disks or your hard drive. Still, you could always spring for an external one like this backpack, although IBM also had one of its own to sell you. If you're thinking by now that this Model 56 is a bit underpowered, you're not alone. Even IBM thought so at the time. with the souped up Model 56 introduced less than a year later on September 21st, 1992. This one bumped up the processor to a 50MHz 486 SLC2, came with a 104 or 212MB hard drive, sparkling XGA graphics, OS2 version 2, and an extra drive bay. The extra high density floppy drive that this one has followed a month later on October 30th. Already existing machines weren't entirely left out either, with IBM also offering a 486 upgrade on a card. Simply take out the old 386 card, drop in the 486 equivalent, and hey presto, your Model 56 now has a much hairier chest. Ultimately though, there's not much else you can do to upgrade one of these machines beside the 486 card, more RAM or a bigger hard drive, and this brings us to the Achilles heel of this system, and indeed most of its siblings. While the PS2 line, and the microchannel architecture in particular, was meant to put IBM back on top of the industry, it didn't quite pan out the way they'd hoped. MCA may have been technically superior to the older ISA standard, but IBM's hefty licensing fees and cynical attempt to flex its muscle prompted the PC industry to simply ignore them and keep doing their own thing. IBM ended up being practically the only company to support MCA, and as a result, expansion opportunities for one of these are very limited. With the industry racing ahead with the new PCI standard and IBM's role shrinking, the company ultimately conceded defeat and began winding up the entire PS2 line in April 1993, with the last PS2s, including some later revision Model 56s, disappearing by the end of June 1995. IBM's new PC series, introduced in October 1994, was the company's return to industry standards, although by that point the tide was already going out on them anyway. So then, what do we make of the PS2 Model 56? It's certainly no powerhouse, and the lack of support for the MCA bus means your upgrade options are painfully limited, so if you're looking for a project box you can tinker with, then you'd probably be better off letting this one sail on by. Ironically though, while the higher end PS2s might have the better specs, you'd be better off actually picking from the lower end models 25 through 40, since they all use ISA. But that's not to say that this is a bad computer by any means. Indeed, I've actually got a bit of a soft spot for this one. While all eyes at the time would have been on the latest Compaq or Packard Bell rolling off the assembly lines, the Model 56 was working quietly at its desk, crunching numbers and taking care of business. It has its role and it accomplishes it well, and the trick to getting the most enjoyment out of this one is to just not set your expectations too high. This is a workhorse, plain and simple. It doesn't stand out, nor does it draw attention to itself. It's boring but functional, just as IBM intended. Thanks for checking out my review of my PS2 Model 56. If for some unknown reason you actually enjoyed that, there are some others in my back catalogue. Direct your eyeballs there now, and I'll see you back here for something else sometime soon.